name is Callie Williams, and I am the Education and Outreach Director Outreach Coordinator for the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program. And today we are touring the Anderson House, also known as the Quaker Meeting House here in downtown Little Rock. Henry Mooney Anderson moved to Little Rock with his mother in the late 1880s. His father was Captain James Monroe Anderson, who usually went by his middle name, Monroe, and was a well-known figure in Marianna, Arkansas. James Anderson was born in Tennessee, and after serving in the Confederacy, he moved to Marianna, where he opened a law practice. He married Mary Jane Mooney of Helena, and then they crossed the Mississippi River. The Mooney family that she was a part of, Mary Ann, they crossed the Mississippi River into the area that would become Arkansas Territory as early as 1800. So the Mooney family was a very, very early family in Helena. By 1874, James Monroe and his wife were living in Marianna, and he had become mayor. And he was also selected as an Arkansas constitutional delegate for Lee County for the Arkansas Constitution delegate in 1874, the conference. They would have eventually 3 children: Paul, Lee, a daughter, and son Henry Mooney. James Monroe Anderson died in 1882, and after that death, Henry Mooney Anderson moved with his mother to Little Rock, where she started looking for work. He was still in school, so she needed to be able to keep him in school. So by the early 1890s, she had become a local entrepreneur. She had a business on the importation of books, and she also imported general merchandise and equipment. She was mentioned in the local newspaper as, quote, an enterprising lady, engaged in disposing of copies of historical works for the purpose of keeping her young son in school, end quote. She also became a well-known and trusted member of the state legislature support staff, serving as the engrossing clerk and postmistress of the Senate chamber for many years. Unfortunately, the family soon experienced more tragedy when Henry's brother Paul Anderson passed away at age of 25 in 1895. By 1900, both Mary and Henry are living downtown at 210 South Cross Street. He is noted as being a lawyer, but this is the only time in the historical record we can see that he is saying he's a lawyer. Apparently he may have been in law school at the time, but he never finished that education. Because he's also noted as working for the Iron Mountain Railroad in St. Louis about the same time. He becomes a brakeman and then eventually becomes a conductor. Something to remember, it features in the house. Anderson would continue to work for various railroads for the rest of his career. Eventually waking his way up to position of conductor for the St. Louis and Iron Mountain Railroad, and then the Missouri Pacific Railroad. In 1907, he married Elizabeth Bessie Cooper at his mother's home on Cross Street, and in May the following year they had their first son, Monroe. In 1913, Henry Anderson purchased these 2 lots along Markham Street. They were originally known as 201 Valmar. So there was a house on this lot that faced that street rather than Markham. But it's always been 2 lots. They've never been separated. At this time, he had a growing family, wife, and 3 children. If you look inside, if you had a chance to go inside, and I'll leave them there in the kitchen, there are photos of Mr. Anderson and his first wife and 2 first children. These were provided by a family member who we were able to get in contact with. He's a great-great-grandson of Henry Mooney. Sadly, in 1914, Bessie Anderson, his first wife, passed away, followed next year by Mary and Henry Jr., so 2 of their children. So he was widowed, still had a son, and so his mother moved here to help him with the house, I'm assuming. In July of 1916, he remarried to Miss Burton Knight Burroughs, who was also a widow with a young son. And they moved into her property on Park Avenue. He retained ownership here and rented out the small house for several years. But in 1924, this land is considered vacant, and it starts construction on this house, which was finished by 1926. This house represented a major investment in the growing Stiff Station neighborhood, named after Stiff Station on the car line that was down the street. So you probably pass it if you came in from downtown. It's where Kavanaugh and Markham split there, that's Stiff Station. This area was developed by civic leader and local businessman Charles Stiff, and thus the area continues to have his name. It was a middle-class residential area with access to downtown through the streetcar lines, but it was also considered an automobile suburb, with several houses having what you can see here, this kind of early carport structure. And it also had a garage at the back. So the little stone fence you kind of see at the back was actually an auto garage. Both of these were important because they show that by 1920s, this family is rich enough to have a car and to have a house that's built for the car. It's not built to just walk up to. It has some sort of auto significance as well. It's a late example of a craftsman style architecture, which was popular from 1900 through the 1930s. And it was very popular because of magazines such as Craftsman magazine that proliferated throughout the country. It is also a type of bungalow, which was seen as a simple structure when you compare it to what was there earlier, those Victorian ornate homes. This idea of having a bungalow in the 1920s was very stylish. You could have a simple bungalow in the neighborhoods around downtown. The exterior of the Anderson house is unusual. It has two very different types of rock work. The front porch features laid granite along the front porch and the columns here, while the rest of it has this more rough and tumble kind of field stone. You don't really see the mortar in between. Also on the granite, it's important to note the raised marking on the grout lines. Sometimes this is called grapevine mortar, and this is actually a very technical process to do and a very artistic process. So this is money that somebody has paid to make it look like this. Also, as you can see around the outside, there is a stone and cast iron fence that surrounds the side lot. This was most likely a very large garden, as both Mr. Anderson and Mrs. Anderson are noted as being garden club members and having a huge, expansive knowledge of plants in several newspaper articles. The fence is remarkable, nothing really like it in this area in Little Rock. It seems that they might have been collectors and picking up rubble and picking up things from other places that they found, including the millstone and whetstones that are incorporated near the gates. So those are definitely something to see. We also think that the fence itself is older, possibly from about 1900, and was incorporated into this later fence. So it seems like they're picking up antiques from other places and incorporating them in their own house. Also of note on the house, if you look up and see the chimneys on the top, the things at the very top are called chimney pots. These are terracotta, kind of decorative elements at the top. These are super unusual on a craftsman house. They would be more appropriate on kind of like the brick house we see with the little chimney pots across the street. And those are very simple ones. That's more of a Tudor style house. These may also not be original to this house. They may have come from somewhere else and then were reused here. But they're very different and not something we see anywhere else on this one. This is something you would see on a mansion, these kind of very elaborate chimney pots. The inside, if you've been inside and go inside later, you can see that it was very extended to be open and inviting. The large French doors on the front porch open into several rooms. They also echo the interior French doors with integral glass panels. The interior has had little change since it was first built. The kitchen has been updated, and they have slightly renovated the staircase that originally went upstairs to a sleeping porch and large set of rooms. That has been converted to an apartment and is still an apartment with a tenant today. But other than that, the first floor has not changed much other than the kitchen itself. The Anderson family lived here until the 1950s when both passed away. He passed away in 1950. She passed away in 1958. There were several people who lived in the house after that. It was vacant for quite a while. And in the 1970s, Dr. John Sorensen and his wife, Colleen Gavahan, purchased the home. They lived here until 1995, when it was purchased by the local meeting of the Religious Society of Friends. The Religious Society of Friends, as I said, purchased it in 1995. They are also commonly known as Quakers. The Quakerism began in England during the early 17th century under the ministry of George Fox, Margaret Fell, and others. One of their main tenets is their belief that all people can develop a personal relationship with God without the intervention of traditional priests or rituals. They developed their own cultural traditions of peace, simplicity, equality, and integrity. And local congregations are known as monthly meetings and may affiliate with larger quarterly meetings or yearly meetings based on region or relationships and doctrine. The popular nickname for the Religious Society of Friends, Quakers, was originally a term used to ridicule the new religion in the 17th century in England. Eventually, the term became so well known, members began to use it informally to differentiate themselves from other religious groups. Formally, they are known as the Religious Society of Friends, and sometimes just Friends, although the term Quaker is often used interchangeably. The Quaker community has a large impact on the United States early governance, especially in Pennsylvania, where the actual colony was developed by Quakers and had principles including religious liberty and peaceful interaction with local Native Americans. In Arkansas, we don't really have much evidence of when they originally came. We think that there was a group in Little Rock, because we do have oral traditions from African-American school teacher Charlotte Stevens, who noted her early memories of attending a Quaker-led school somewhere in Little Rock. So that would have been right after the Civil War. Also, her father opened a school that may have been on land given by a Quaker, and he was actually a previous slave of Chester Ashley, who's also very prominent in Arkansas politics history. Eventually, that school went away very quickly after the Civil War, and the Little Rock School District kind of purchased that school. Also, after the Civil War, the Freedmen's Committee of the Indiana Yearly Meeting sent Calvin and Alida Clark to Helena, Arkansas, to start an orphanage and school there for newly freed slave population. This soon grew into Southland College, which also included a teacher training program. And by 1873, they had a newly formed monthly meeting known as the Southland Friends, and they had a school that had over 300 students and 200 people meeting in that local group of Quakers. After their retirement, the college campus by 1880s included 5 permanent buildings and had over 300 student enrollment. So huge colony outside of Helena. There's really no existence of it today other than a road called Southland Road. So it's completely gone. It was basically defunct by the 1920s when other institutions in the area took over that role. In the 1930s, there was another Quaker meeting that started in DeWitt, Arkansas, started by local Frank Fox, who discovered the Religious Society of Friends while exploring various Christian denominations to join. He decided that one looked really good, and so he started a meeting there. While the DeWitt meeting is now disbanded, other groups of Quakers continue to meet in Fayetteville and Texarkana. This group began in 1953, the Little Rock monthly meeting. They met in various houses throughout the city until they purchased this property. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, they brought other Quakers into town during the desegregation crisis and some of the other racial tension in town to help mediate meetings between different city leaders. They also helped to sponsor groups of students to interact and to go do civic projects like planting trees and upkeeping people's houses as a way for Black and white students to mix outside of the school. Also, local Quaker Robert Wixom tutored Little Rock 9 member Ernest Green in physics during his years at Central High. This became an official monthly meeting in 1981, and they continue to meet here for weekly meetings. Their meetings are often dominated by silent worship, interspersed with moments of prayer or speaking when a member of the meeting feels led to communicate a message. They have no formal paid staff or worship leader by choice, focusing rather on the group as a community of equals and volunteer-based service. It's currently led on an administrative level by a volunteer clerk who's responsible for administrative tasks such as keeping records and sending correspondence. As I said, they purchased these 2 lots in 1995, and they've continued to take very seriously their commitment to the neighborhood as part of their agreement with the city that the activities and groups here would respect the neighborhood and always maintain a residential feel, so it wouldn't be turned into some huge kind of corporate space. Also, one quick note, when Sorensons sold the house to the Quakers, they kind of showed them, where their kids had slept and all this kind of thing. One thing that they did note that the Andersons that they knew about was 2 unique features of the house. One of those is that the sleeping porch upstairs, a few of those windows have been replaced, but originally they were all railroad windows. So they fell into the wall and they had a leather strap that you could pull up just like you would on a railroad car. So we're thinking that maybe he salvaged them from some railroad work that was happening. Also of interest is as you walk up on the porch, take a look at these large beams on the front of the house that are pretty continuous. They're very unusual to have pieces of wood that large. They also also have one beam underneath the floor. When you walk in the front door, you can't see it, but it is under the floor, and it runs across the width of the house and is a square foot. The beam is underneath the house. They've been told that one of the safest places in Little Rock is their basement. It's very structurally sound. As I said, it continues to be used as the Religious Society of Friends meeting hall. It now sets up for their functions in terms of meeting, a library space. So it does contain still these small rooms of a house, but they have different functions now. Thank you all for coming today. So thank you all very much for coming, and I hope you all enjoy the inside.